Hey everybody, how are y'all doing? This is Rob of Ro2R Review. Welcome back to the channel, and today let's talk about all of this crazy cool Resident Evil goodness that's coming to the Switch. So a quick reminder before I get into the topic of today's video, there is of course the Dark Souls Remastered giveaway that I am doing right now. And if you guys remember from a couple of videos ago, as long as we hit 10,500 subscribers, which we are slowly closing in on, and as long as you're following me on Twitter, I'm going to be picking a winner once we hit that subscriber mark, and you could win Dark Souls Remastered for the Switch. I use Twitter because it's a great way for me to contact and speak with the winner privately. It's actually one of the only ways to do it that's safe and comfortable for me, just the way I want to do it, because I know a couple of people have said, oh, I'd love to enter and I love your channel, but I don't use Twitter and so I can't enter. And I'm sorry about that. It's just the way it is. Twitter is what's going to work for me. It's my only giveaway I'm ever probably going to do, at least for the foreseeable future. So that's just what works and how I'm going to do it for now. But I do encourage everyone, of course, to enter. So again, it's really simple. Make sure you're subscribed. We'll hit that mark. And if you're following me on Twitter at the time I pick, you could win the game. Anywho, let's move away from all that nonsense and let's talk about the goods. We're talking about Resident Evil coming to the Switch. This is pretty crazy, and I think the only reason I was so excited to talk about this is just because I happen to be a massive Resident Evil fan. It is one of my favorite non-Nintendo franchises, and it might even be my favorite. I'm not 100% sure. I've kind of tried to rank my favorite non-Nintendo franchises, and there are quite a few that I'm a huge fan of course. And every time I've sort of started to do it, Resident Evil makes it up near the top, man. So I'm a big Resident Evil fan. I go way, way back to the original on the PlayStation 1 in the mid-90s. Great game, and I've been a huge fan of the franchise ever since. So when this information came out today, I, of course, got really excited. So what are we talking about? What's happening with all this Resident Evil stuff? Well, Capcom randomly confirmed via Twitter earlier this morning that Resident Evil, Resident Evil 0, and the one and only Resident Evil 4 will be coming to the Switch sometime in 2019. I believe they used the phrasing during 2019, during the year 2019. And they gave no other details than that. And they said more details will be coming soon. So kind of cryptic as far as those fine details and some information, but obviously the main points are pretty clear. They're giving us these 3 classic Resident Evil games on the Switch, which means we're seeing more Capcom support, more support for Resident Evil on the current Nintendo platform, which happens to be the Switch. It's very exciting. There are some questions. I, of course, was talking about this with you guys on Twitter earlier this morning as well once this happened, because I was elated to see this. Even though I've played all of these games, I was really happy and ecstatic to see this happening. But there are a couple of questions I think that come to mind for a lot of us, and the ones, like I said, that I brought up on Twitter today. As far as Resident Evil and Resident Evil 0, are these going to be just the original standard definition versions of these games? Is this going to be the PlayStation 1 classic of the original and the standard definition GameCube release of Resident Evil 0? Or are they going to be, similar to the collection you can see I have right here, are they going to be the HD remasters or the remake of the original game, which was first a 2002 GameCube game before it made it to HD in 2014, and then also the HD remaster of the GameCube Resident Evil 0. Kind of confusing, a bunch of details going on there. Is it going to be the HD remasters of those games, or is it going to be the originals? We would have to assume it's going to be the HD remasters. And then the other question I also had was, are we going to see physical releases of these games? So essentially, as far as that first question goes, like I was even just saying, I think that Resident Evil and Resident Evil 0 are clearly going to be those HD remasters. And the 2014 versions, not the original 2002 release and 2003, I want to say, for Resident Evil 0, I think they're going to be the 2014 remakes of these 2 games, which includes not only HD visuals of those original really beautiful classic GameCube games, but also updated controls. That's a very important component here to what they did with the 2014 versions, is they also gave an option for both the classic tank controls, which is, in my opinion, the only way to play classic Resident Evil. I know they're bad controls, but I'm sorry. I'm an old school fan, and I love those bad controls. It's the way I like to play. But not only does it include those, they also created an option where it's more standard, kind of typical 3D controls where your analog stick moves you in whatever direction you move the analog stick, which again is not how those classic games worked. Typically, up on your analog stick moved your character forward no matter which direction they were facing. That's why they become tank controls. So I think that they're going to give basically the HD Remaster 2014 treatment to these games coming to the Switch. Of course, it's not confirmed, so who knows what kind of wacky stuff Capcom is planning, but it's probably safe to put money on it being those versions. As far as the retail release thing, you guys know me. I'm a physical games guy. I like my physical media. I don't love downloading my games. And so I am really hoping that we get a surprise announcement that there will be physical releases for these games. Even if it's these two games together as opposed to individual releases of Resident Evil and Zero and then 4 on its own or whatever they would do. I would love to see those physical. I want those physical Switch cartridges so badly. However, I certainly don't expect it. I mean, we have to remember, Resident Evil 1, the 2014 HD remaster of that, first released digital only for like 20 bucks, I believe. It was only the following year that they gave Resident Evil and Zero a physical release here. It initially launched digital only. And I would have to think, because these are all very old games that have released on many platforms, that they're probably going to make these digital only. Maybe physical down the road, but I'm not holding my breath. If you're like me and you also love physical media, I would also not hold your breath. I would expect all of these games, these 3 in 2019, to only be digital. Now, another question this makes me think of is, are these going to release at different periods throughout the year, or are they going to dump all of these games at one time? I think it's going to be the former, based on that phrasing in that tweet, like I said, where they essentially say, during the year of 2019, we're going to be releasing these games. That to me sounds like they're going to periodically throughout the year release, maybe Resident Evil is going to be released like in the first quarter, and then maybe Resident Evil 0 is in the second quarter, and then sometime in the back half of the year they release Resident Evil 4, or whatever order they decide to do them. I would think that's what they're going to do. I would be shocked if they dumped all 3 of these games at one time. I mean, especially if they're individual for sale. If this is like a weird 3-pack, what if this is like a 3-pack of all 3 games in one? Then obviously it would all be at once, but I don't really expect that. I don't think many people are expecting that. Sounds to me like they're going to do individual releases and just kind of sprinkle them throughout the year. And that'll be fun, because it'll keep the excitement going for like, oh, Resident Evil game now, and in a couple of months we might get another one and then another one. I have to say, Resident Evil 4, you guys, it's a classic. It's one of the all-time greats. The remake of the original game is one of my favorite games of all time, but Resident Evil 4, man, that original 2005 GameCube game, it is literally one of the top 5 games I've ever played. It is a top 5 favorite game for me. If I was going to make a list of my favorite games of all time, it's in that top 5. I love that game so much. And I think that, for anyone who might not be familiar with it or never played it, or maybe younger people out there who just have never gotten to it, really Resident Evil 4 and Gears of War 2006, I think those 2 games are really responsible for a huge shift in action games and shooter games and third-person over-the-camera games, where those games really kind of pioneered that in a lot of ways. And I firmly believe that Resident Evil 4 and Gears of War were massively important to defining the 7th generation. The 360 PS3 Wii era, I think so much of where gaming went in a lot of different genres and with a lot of gameplay mechanics and graphical tricks came from those 2 games. Resident Evil 4, one of the most important releases, I think, of all time. Not to mention the game was a freaking masterpiece. I went to E3 in 2004 and actually played the game, before it came out. And this was at a time where the internet didn't give us all these things, so it felt more special to be at E3, and it felt more special to play a game of that size, a year before anyone else had their hands on it. That was really, really cool. So, hey man, I am pumped. I am so excited to have Resident Evil 4 again and to play it on the Switch. Hopefully it's also the HD version and not the standard definition version, although I know that some of the HD ports of Resident Evil 4 over the years haven't been that good, so whatever they do, I just hope it's of really high quality. So anywho, when we look beyond just the details and the excitement of these 3 games coming to the platform, what else does this mean? What else does this tell us? Does this mean something more about relationships between Nintendo and Capcom or whatnot, or future titles? Or is it nothing more than just more Resident Evil games? Of course, the Resident Evil Revelations 1 and 2 also came to the Switch late last year in 2017. And so these are 3 new games. Does this give us a hint as to anything else in the future for the Switch? Maybe. I think one of the first things we all think about, and I even joked about this on Twitter also, is, oh, does this mean Resident Evil 2 Remake is actually going to make its way to the Switch? I'm sure a lot of us thought about that. A lot of us would love to see it. Come on, that is my most anticipated unreleased game. Well, not including Metroid Prime 4, but we don't know anything about Metroid Prime 4 yet. So, removing Prime 4 from the conversation, Resident Evil 2 is my #1 most hyped game. Even over Smash Bros. Ultimate, I cannot wait. However, I think that we'd all be fools to expect Resident Evil 2 to make it to the Switch. I think that we all know that's just probably not going to make sense. You know, it was neat that they did a Resident Evil 7 cloud version, I guess, in Japan a couple of months ago, but it was also kind of dumb. I don't know what they were doing there. Would they try to do that with Resident Evil 2? I guess maybe. But clearly that's not going to make anyone happy or excited, and it's not really going to work too well, I don't think, over in the West here. So I'm going to personally say my guess here is that no, Resident Evil 2 is just simply not going to come to the Switch right now. I don't think that that's a plan. But there is one thing, and this may sound crazy to you guys, but I'm going to throw this out there and I'm going to stand by this. There's one possible thing for the future that this may be leading towards. I feel pretty good about this. And while it's not the remake of Resident Evil 2, I wonder if it would be Resident Evil 8. Now, I know that probably sounds really insane when you first hear it, especially because I don't think very many people at all have even said the words out loud, Resident Evil 8. Like, no one's been thinking about that. But I actually have been. It's like, hey, Resident Evil 7 was a great return to form. It was very successful for Capcom. They had great accolades, critical acclaim, good sales, not I think the great sales they were expecting, but definitely not bad. It sold several million copies. That game, by all accounts, is considered a success. Most importantly, because it was loved by fans and critics. So right now, they're riding a great high when it comes to Resident Evil, coming off of two controversial games, Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6. Two games that I actually think are not nearly as bad as people want to tell you. They are not great, and they definitely were steps backwards or steps down from what Resident Evil really should be, but they weren't actually bad games. So I just want to put that out there. They're totally average, fine action zombie games. But they clearly weren't selling as well. Okay, Resident Evil 6 wasn't selling as well, and people were very upset about them and very down on Resident Evil. The name was kind of tarnished. Resident Evil 7 has saved that. Now there's good press when it comes to Resident Evil 2, especially, or when it comes to Resident Evil, especially with Resident Evil 2 coming and how great that looks and all the positive press. Now everyone's excited about these games coming to the Switch. This is all great news. And so why wouldn't Capcom continue to ride this into a Resident Evil Part 8? They are clearly going to do that. The story beats and cliffhanger ending of Resident Evil 7 obviously sets up connections to the rest of the series and a possible future for the sequel game, Resident Evil 8. And so, long story short, I totally believe Resident Evil 8 is in the works at Capcom. I think they're making that game. And when that game is going to release, who knows? Is it going to release for the current gen? Maybe. And if it is, then that's when I think, yeah, a Switch version might be in the works. I think that Capcom has been wanting to work with Nintendo again, wanting to put Resident Evil on. There was all these talks about them trying to convince Nintendo to upgrade the Switch hardware to make Resident Evil 7 work. And then, even though 7 didn't release, they did release the cloud version. Then they gave us the Revelation games. Now we've got these coming. I think that absolutely, if they start with the Switch as an available platform from the ground up with Resident Evil 8, and if Resident Evil 8 isn't 5 or 6 years down the road, then yeah, I think this is opening the doors for Capcom to show us, hey, Resident Evil 8 is also a game we might bring to the Switch. Now, of course, they have to actually be making Resident Evil 8, and for all we know, maybe they've yet to even start development. Maybe that's not been their focus. Maybe they've had all of their Resident Evil team on the Resident Evil 2 remake only, and they just haven't even cracked the surface when it comes to Resident Evil 8. And so it's like I said, 6, 7, 8 years away. Who knows? Maybe. But I just don't believe that. I mean, my just random guess as a fan is that I feel like they've probably started some preliminary work on Resident Evil 8. And they would have done that in a world where the Switch is a platform to make games for. And so I think they would be developing it in a way that could work on the Switch, or developing a Switch version right alongside the other ones. So I just think it gives us a lot of hope for that to be a possibility, and this just further shows it. Bringing these games, showing Resident Evil love to the Nintendo audience and to the Nintendo Switch, having these games portable. I'm gonna quadruple dip on these games. I've bought these 3 games so many times. Well, 0 I've only bought once before, but the other games, 4 and the original, I've bought many times. And so, yeah, I'm going to quadruple dip on these games or whatever it would be because I'm just really excited. So, I don't know. That's kind of how I'm feeling. That's the news. That's what's going on. A couple Resident Evil games coming next year. I think this means another big Resident Evil Nintendo announcement is also in our future. Who knows for when? Who knows what it's going to be? But you've heard kind of my theories and thoughts and what's going on. And so that's it. I want to hear what you guys have to say. Are you excited about these games? Have you played these games? Have you not played these games? Do you think this is good news? Do you not think it's good news? Do you hate Capcom? Whatever. What do you think about Resident Evil 2 Remake on the Switch? What do you think about Resident Evil 8 on the Switch? All that stuff. Talk about it below. All opinions are welcome. And that is it from me. So thanks as always for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Rule of 2 Review, and I'll catch you next time on another video.